Imagine the moment your uncle walks in and catches you in the most intimate act imaginable. What happens next? An awkward silence? A heated confrontation? You won't believe how things spiraled when my uncle caught me in the act. It all began with the warm sunlight pouring through the trees outside my Uncle Tom's house, spilling across the floor in golden streaks. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest room, the one I always avoided when I visited. Mostly because I never liked looking at myself. But today, something felt different. I'd been coming to my uncle's place for years, escaping the noise of my life in the city. But this time it felt different. Maybe it was because I was different now. I hadn't even planned on standing there this long, but I couldn't help it. There was this odd feeling inside me, like I was finally seeing myself for the first time, really seeing myself. The girl in the mirror seemed both familiar and strange at the same time, like someone I recognized but couldn't quite place. I wasn't a child anymore, not really, but I wasn't fully grown up either. I stepped closer to the mirror, examining my face. I had just turned 17 a few months ago, and I could already feel the changes happening inside me. My face was fuller now, my features softer. My body had changed so much in the last year. My hips were fuller, my waist more defined, and I was starting to notice that I carried myself differently, with more confidence. I touched my hair, running my fingers through the strands. It was longer now, brushing just past my shoulders, and it had this natural wave to it that I could never quite control. But today, it looked almost graceful the way it framed my face. I wasn't sure when it had happened, but I was starting to like the way I looked. I couldn't remember a time when I hadn't been self-conscious about how I looked, but something inside me had shifted, and now I was starting to appreciate the changes. I tilted my head, letting the soft light from the window hit my skin. There was a warmth there, a warmth I'd never really noticed before. It was as if I was growing into my own skin, and for the first time I felt comfortable with it. I ran my hand over my arm, feeling the smoothness of my skin, the warmth underneath it. I wasn't just a girl anymore, I was becoming someone else, someone I could be proud of. Just as I was about to turn away from the mirror, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, my heart jumping into my throat, and I spun around quickly. There, standing in the doorway, was my uncle. I hadn't heard him come in. He was standing there, his arms loosely crossed, his dark eyes watching me in a way that made my breath catch for a moment. I was frozen, caught in his gaze, unsure of what to say or do. It wasn't the way he'd always looked at me, like a niece, but something different in the way he was looking at me now. I quickly dropped my eyes, feeling a flush of heat rush to my cheeks. "Oh, I didn't hear you knock," I stammered, stepping away from the mirror and shifting my weight nervously. My heart was beating faster than usual, and I couldn't quite understand why. He smiled, but there was a slight edge to it, like he was unsure whether to say something or just let the moment pass. "It's fine," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze still on me. "I just wasn't sure if you heard me." I didn't mean to interrupt. I nodded, trying to ignore the way my pulse was racing. There was something about him that always made me nervous in the best way. He wasn't just my uncle anymore, he was becoming something else in my mind, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face that just yet. It was his youthful good looks and attractive features that always ignited something inside me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering in my chest. "You didn't interrupt," I said, the words feeling awkward on my tongue. "I was just looking at myself." It sounded silly even as I said it. Who stands in front of a mirror and just looks at themselves? But there was something about today that made it feel like I was seeing myself for the first time. Tom pushed off from the door frame and took a step toward me, his eyes still locked on mine. He was standing so close now, his presence filling up the space between us. My breath caught in my throat again, and I could feel the heat rising on my skin. I shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't seem to notice. You look different, he said, his voice quiet but direct. I blinked, not sure how to respond. What do you mean? I asked, feeling my cheeks flush even deeper. I don't know, he said, taking another step closer. It's just there's something about you. You look like you've grown up, like you're becoming someone else, someone stronger. His words felt like they sank straight into me, and for a moment, I didn't know how to react. No one had ever really said anything like that to me before. I didn't know how to take it, but at the same time, it felt good. It felt true, like maybe I was starting to see myself the way other people saw me. I guess I am, I said softly, smiling a little as I looked down at the floor, trying to hide the nervousness that was creeping up on me. I've been changing in more ways than one. There was a long pause, and I could feel his gaze on me. I didn't look up, I kept my eyes focused on the floor, suddenly unsure of myself again. Why was he looking at me like that? It was like I wasn't his niece anymore, like he was seeing me for the first time too. I think it suits you, he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. You look really good. I swallowed, feeling a rush of heat flood my face. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I was unsure of what to do. Was he just being kind, or was he saying something more? Before I could answer, he stepped back, giving me some space, as if he realized how close he'd gotten. He cl. eared his throat, running a hand through his hair, and I could tell he was a little flustered now too. Well, anyway, he said with a small smile, his voice light again. I'll leave you to it. Just wanted to say hi. I nodded quickly, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment as he turned and walked out of the room. I stood there for a moment longer, still feeling the warmth of his words, the way he had looked at me. There was something about it, something that made my heart race and my mind spin. Maybe I wasn't just changing on the outside, maybe something was shifting inside too. He smiled a faint, almost sad smile. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. That means more than you know. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavy, but somehow comforting. It was as if in that brief exchange, we'd come to an unspoken understanding, a mutual respect for the boundaries we'd both crossed. And yet, there was still a lingering tension, a feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't quite define. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway, glancing back at me with a look that I couldn't quite place. It was a look of vulnerability, of trust, but also of caution, as if he were warning me to tread carefully. And in that moment, I realized that whatever lay between us, whatever secrets we'd uncovered, there was still so much more left unsaid. I knew that this was far from over, that the questions swirling in my mind wouldn't be easily answered. But for now, all I could do was wait, to let the tension simmer, and hope that in time, the truth would reveal itself. The days that followed felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. Every interaction with my uncle carried a subtle undercurrent, a feeling that had been absent before our late-night conversation in my room. I'd catch him glancing my way when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes carrying a mixture of curiosity and something else, something warm and unspoken. One evening, he invited me to join him for a drive, something we used to do often when I was younger. He said it was to get some fresh air, but I could sense there was more to it. There was a subtle excitement in his tone, like he was letting me into a world he'd kept hidden. The sun was setting as we drove through the winding back roads, the golden light casting a warm glow over the fields. I felt a strange sense of peace being there with him, a feeling of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. The silence between us was comfortable, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the trees as we passed. Eventually, he pulled over by a small clearing, one we'd often visited years ago. He leaned back against the hood of the car, his gaze distant as he looked out at the horizon. I joined him, feeling the warmth of the metal beneath me. The closeness between us was both comforting and somehow charged. "Remember our this spot?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yeah," I replied with a smile. You used to bring me here all the time. Said it was your secret hideaway. He chuckled, nodding. Some things don't change. We sat there for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, his presence familiar and grounding. And yet, there was something new, something unspoken lingering between us. After a moment, he turned to me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. I just want you to know I'm really glad you're here. It's been a while since I felt understood. The words hit me in a way I hadn't expected, and I found myself reaching out, placing a hand on his arm. I'm glad I'm here too, I said quietly. I've missed us. He looked down at my hand, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. And then, in a moment that felt both natural and surreal, he leaned in, his face mere inches from mine. We couldn't control ourselves in everything that happened between us. Our bodies met, wrapping around each other in a way that felt inevitable. I could feel his breath warm and steady, and before I knew it, our lips met in a soft, tender kiss. It was gentle, filled with an unspoken understanding, a warmth that seemed to seep into every fiber of my being. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the world around us fading away until there was only the two of us, caught in that fleeting, beautiful moment. It wasn't rushed or hurried, it was a soft, genuine expression of the closeness we'd built, a connection that felt both new and familiar. When we finally pulled back, he looked at me with a mixture of surprise and something else, something deeper, unguarded. I don't know what came over me, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. Maybe it was meant to happen. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of my words. Maybe, he echoed, his eyes searching mine, filled with a quiet intensity that left me breathless. We stayed there, side by side, the silence between us comfortable and charged. Each of us lost in our own thoughts. The air was thick with a sense of shared understanding, a bond that felt deeper than anything I'd ever known. In that moment, it was as if we'd crossed an invisible line, one that neither of us could or would ever take back. As the stars began to emerge, he took my hand in his, giving it a gentle squeeze. There were no words, no need to explain what we were feeling. Everything we needed to say was conveyed in that simple gesture, a warmth that spoke volumes. Eventually, we made our way back to the car. The drive home was filled with a comfortable silence, each of us basking in the warmth of that shared moment. I could feel a new sense of closeness between us, an understanding that went beyond words. It was as if we'd unlocked a part of ourselves we hadn't known existed, a part that had been waiting for this moment all along. When we got back to the house, he lingered for a moment, his gaze meeting mine with a soft, almost vulnerable expression. Thank you, he said quietly. For tonight, for everything. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. Anytime. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the evening in my mind. The memory of his warmth, his closeness, still fresh. It was a feeling I couldn't quite describe, a mixture of peace and excitement, of knowing that something beautiful had taken root between us, something that would only grow stronger with time. The following days were filled with quiet moments like that, moments that spoke louder than words ever could. We'd steal glances across the room, share subtle touches that felt both natural and exhilarating. It was as if we were both dancing around an unspoken truth, a connection that was as undeniable as it was unexpected. One afternoon, as we were working together on a project in the garage, he brushed a stray lock of hair from my face, his touch lingering for just a second longer than necessary. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that instant, I felt a rush of warmth, a feeling of belonging that left me both comforted and thrilled. Without thinking, I leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. He looked at me, surprise flickered in his eyes, but then he smiled, a warmth in his gaze that made my heart flutter. Thank you, he murmured, his voice filled with gratitude. For what? For being here, for understanding. I could feel the weight of his words, the depth of his feelings, and I knew without a doubt that this was real, that what we shared was something rare and beautiful. It wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was the beginning of something that would shape us both in ways we couldn't yet comprehend. As the weeks passed, our bond only grew stronger. Each day was filled with quiet moments of warmth, of shared understanding. It was a connection that went beyond words, a feeling that resonated in every glance, every touch, every shared smile. And even though I didn't know where this path would lead us, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be, that I'd found something truly special, something that would stay with me no matter where life took us. It was time for a hiking trip we had been planning for years. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange as we sat on the edge of the cliff overlooking the valley. The wind was cool but gentle, the kind of breeze that makes you feel alive and present. It was the perfect evening, and I couldn't believe we were here together, just the two of us, miles away from everything. I couldn't ignore the fact that there was more between us than just an uncle-niece relationship. And sitting here with nothing but the wind, the silence, and the endless sky between us, I could feel it in every glance, every mile we shared. "Wow," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked out over the landscape. "This is unbelievable." I nodded, my eyes tracing the lines of the hills stretching out before us. The world seemed so vast from up here, and yet everything felt so close, so intimate in this moment. "Yeah, it's amazing. I can't believe we finally made it." We'd been talking about doing this trip for months, planning each detail, where we'd stay, what trails we'd hike, even which songs we'd listen to on the drive. And now here we were, the reality of it felt surreal. Uncle Tom turned toward me, a slight smile playing on his lips. "I'm glad we did this. I don't think I would have had the courage to come on my own." I could tell by the way his eyes met mine that he meant it. Tom was always the life of the party, the one who joked around and made everyone feel at ease. But in moments like this, I saw a side of him I didn't often get to see, one that was quiet, thoughtful, a little more serious. It was hard to imagine him as anything but confident, yet I knew there were parts of him that he kept hidden. "I'm glad we're here too," I said softly. "I needed this. I've been so busy with everything lately. It feels good to just escape for a while." The words hung in the air for a moment, and then Ethan nodded slowly. "I get that. Life can get so overwhelming sometimes." I shifted, pulling my knees up to my chest as I wrapped my arms around them. It felt comfortable here, like I could say things I didn't usually say, things that I had been thinking for a while now but hadn't found the right time to say. "I feel like things are changing," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "Like I'm changing. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I'm on the edge of something new, like I'm figuring out who I really am." He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze gentle. "You're not alone in that. I feel the same way. It's weird, isn't it? Like one day you're just one person and the next you're someone completely different." There was a sense of understanding in his words that made my heart swell a little. He wasn't just talking to fill the silence, he was listening, really listening, and that made all the difference. "I guess we're both figuring it out," I said, smiling softly. "But it's nice to have someone who gets it." His smile deepened, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, something that felt both familiar and new. "I'm glad I'm here with you. You've always been someone I can talk to." The way he said it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't fully understood before. I always thought we were just two people who happened to know each other, who shared a few laughs and occasional deep conversations. But this trip had changed something. It was like we were seeing each other in a different light, no longer just friends, but something more. "I'm glad you're here too," I said, looking at him directly this time. There was something in his eyes, hat made my heart flutter, and for a moment, I wondered if he could feel the same shift between us. "I think this trip is the best thing we could have done. It's like we're starting something new." The silence between us was comfortable now, not awkward like I had expected. It was like we were both processing everything we had said and felt, letting it sit with us before speaking again. Uncle Tom was the first to break the silence, his voice quieter than before, almost hesitant. "Do you ever think about the future?" His question caught me off guard. It wasn't something I had expected to hear, and yet it seemed like exactly the kind of question I had been asking myself. The future was a big unknown thing, and I couldn't help but wonder where it would take me. "I think about it all the time," I said, a little more honestly than I intended. "But the more I think about it, the more I feel like I don't have it all figured out. I don't know where I'm going or who I'm going to be. I just know that I want to make the most of the time I have now." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that. It's like everyone expects us to have everything planned out, but the truth is, we're just trying to figure it out day by day." I smiled, feeling a sense of relief in his words. It was nice to know that someone else felt just as uncertain, just as unsure about the future as I did. It made me feel like I wasn't so alone in my thoughts. "I guess we're all just trying to find our way," I said, a little more confidently now. "And maybe we don't need to have it all figured out. Maybe it's okay to just take things one step at a time." He smiled back, the weight of his words lifting as he chuckled lightly. "Yeah, maybe we don't need to know everything. But I think we're both doing pretty well so far." I laughed, the sound light and carefree. "I think so too." There was something in the way he said that, something that made me feel warm inside. It wasn't just a throw-away comment, it was the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel like I mattered. And in that moment, sitting on that cliff with him, I realized that maybe, just maybe, he was someone who would be there through all the uncertainty, through all the changes. And maybe, for the first time, I didn't mind not having all the answers. The sky had darkened now, and the stars were beginning to twinkle above us. It was peaceful, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, side by side, letting the quiet of the world wrap around us. Finally, I turned to him, my voice soft but steady. "Thank you, Tom. For being here, for all of it." He turned to look at me, his smile gentle and sincere. "Anytime. I'm glad we're here together." And in that moment, I knew that this trip, this evening, this time with him, it wasn't just about the beautiful view or the adventure. It was about the connection we had, the bond that had grown between us over time. And as we sat together watching the stars appear one by one, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that no matter what the future held, we would be there to face it together. In the days following our quiet, unspoken moment, a new rhythm settled into our lives. It was as if we discovered a hidden layer to our connection, one that we both recognized yet chose to let unfold slowly at its own pace. There were no grand declarations or obvious shifts in our routine, but an unspoken understanding wove itself into our conversations, our shared glances, the way we seemed to gravitate toward each other every now and then. I'd catch him watching me with a quiet smile, and my heart would race in a way that felt both exhilarating and grounding. Our lives carried on, marked by familiar routines and quiet moments, yet each one felt somehow more vibrant, more alive. It was as if our closeness had given us a new lens through which to see the world, and everything felt richer, more meaningful. One evening, we found ourselves sitting together on the back porch. The soft hum of crickets filled the air. The sky was painted in shades of deep indigo, a scattering of stars flickering above us, and the warm summer breeze carried a sense of peace. We talked about everything and nothing, our voices low as we shared stories, dreams, and quiet reflections. "I've always loved it here," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the stars. "There's something about this place. It's like it has a life of its own." I nodded, feeling the same connection to the space, to the memories it held. "It does feel like home," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked over at me, his expression softened by the dim light. "You know, you're part of what makes it feel that way." The words hung in the air, filled with an honesty that resonated deeply. I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet gratitude that I struggled to put into words. There was something undeniably real in his words, a feeling that went beyond anything I'd known before. In that moment, a memory came flooding back, one from years ago, when I was just a kid. He'd taken me fishing for the first time, patiently showing me how to bait the hook, cast the line, and wait for a bite. I'd been impatient, eager for something to happen, but he taught me the value of patience, of savoring the quiet moments in between. And here we were, years later, still learning from each other, still savoring the quiet moments that filled the spaces between words. As the night deepened, we sat there side by side, a comfortable silence enveloping us. I felt his hand brush against mine, a soft, unassuming gesture that felt both familiar and new. I looked over at him, meeting his gaze, and in that instant, everything else faded away. It was just us, two people bound by a connection that defied explanation. Our hands intertwined, fingers lacing together in a way that felt both natural and profound. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, the warmth of his presence, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt before. We didn't need words to express what lay between us. It was there in the quiet closeness, in the way our hands fit together, in the unspoken understanding that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Eventually, he shifted, turning to face me with a softness in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. "I don't know where this is going," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to find out." I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. "Me too." And with that, it felt as if a weight had been lifted, as if we'd finally acknowledged the path we'd been walking together. There was no rush, no need to define or label what we had. It was enough to simply let it unfold, to let each moment be a testament to the connection we'd built. The days turned into weeks, each one filled with small, quiet moments that made up the fabric of our lives. We'd go for long drives, exploring the winding roads that stretched out like ribbons across the countryside, sharing laughter and stories along the way. We'd spend evenings in the kitchen, cooking together, our movements synchronized in a way that felt effortless and real. And in those moments, I felt a sense of belonging that went beyond words, a feeling that I was exactly where I was meant to be. One morning, as I sat by the window watching the first light of dawn break across the sky, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was a quiet, unassuming peace, one that came from knowing